Welcome to the Ppiac podcast, highlighting the professional private investigators of Colorado and beyond. My name is Tarek Ocone. I'm the VP of Training for the Ppiac. I want to thank you for listening to our show, and if you enjoy what you hear, please pass it along to somebody else. The podcast is an accompaniment to our in-person monthly meetings, conferences, and development courses. Learn more at www.ppiac.org or email me at training@ppiac.org. We're thinking of the Development Institute for April. That might change, so we really need you guys to help us out with finding a date. So I'm going to send out an email. Please respond to it with what date would work best for you, and that way we can quickly nail it down. We can start marketing it. And with that in mind, we need some more people to help with the subcommittees. This is just simply being a physical body that helps us do things like maybe marketing, social media. We need people. And the more people and the more time we have, the more successful we'll be. Our goal is to try to have 50 people enrolled this year. Colorado Investigator Development Institute. CD, not CD, like CD characters. This is an opportunity for new and experienced investigators to come and get some training, refresh basic stuff. For new people, this is a great come into the industry type event where if you're thinking about being a PI or something similar, security industry, you can come in, learn all the basics of how do I start a business, what type of business formation, what type of roles. We heard a couple of people give their titles. In our event, we're going to hopefully give more than just 2 or 3, but let you really feel what it means to be an investigator. And then for those of you who are more experienced and senior, it's an opportunity to come back, refresh that training, and also participate and mentor other people. This is going to come up in a few months. There'll be more information and all that coming out. Please participate if you'd like to. We're really trying to get more food options. I'm going to ask every time you go out to eat, where if you think like, oh, this would be some good food to have at a meeting, and it's the type of food that's doable. If you want to help me build a list, I'm also going to send that out. I would like to get a nice long running list of food vendors we can approach for potential sponsorship, food donations, add to the pizza. We don't have to take the pizza away, but just add to it. So if you'd like to be on the food subcommittee, let me know. I'm also going to start an online book resource, kind of like an online library. This is only because I find myself piling up with books in my house that I no longer use. Like this one. This was a popular book. I read it. I have no reason to keep hanging on to it. Maybe somebody else would have an interest in it. I don't want to necessarily sell it. That's not my intention. But if you want to learn about OSINT, hey, I got a book. So if you have other things, like maybe in your library of dictionary of real estate terms or insurance, create an online library so somebody can say, hey, bring that book to the next meeting. I want to read that for a few weeks. And then we can do that. And that way, if you're like me, a book hoarder, you can start to get these things off your shelves, and then maybe other people can be exposed to stuff you're interested in. So if you want to learn how to do stuff like that, this is a great book for that. And I'm going to leave this here, so if anybody would like to take that home and read it, please do so, and then look for the emails also to participate. And when you're done with it, bring it back. So let's try to do that. So if you're going through your bookshelves and you see something that's just been sitting on the shelves, you've already read it, and somebody else might benefit, bring it on in. Let's get a book trade going. Open source intelligence techniques. This would be like your research of people going in and finding all the publicly available information that's out there. This is all stuff that you're not required to hack in or break in or bypass passwords. You're basically going out and gathering publicly available information. But more or less it's research type stuff, background type stuff.
We are going to get this party started right now.
All right, are we ready for tonight's presenters? Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. Our first presenter is going to be talking about taxes for small business. But let me bring up Ms. McGowan, our tax professional. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hello and thank you. So my name's Mandy McGowan. I have been in tax and accounting for 16 years. I know I look a little young to be retiring, but I'm retiring out of the tax world. I do a lot of financial coaching for entrepreneurs now, working with entrepreneurs to help understand how to run a business successfully, so how to maximize their tax write-offs, which is what we're going to be talking about a little bit tonight. Finance is different as an entrepreneur. Like, it doesn't look like it does for employees of a company, for people who have W-2 income. There's a lot more that we have to be tracking and taking care of. And how we handle or don't handle our finances ties back to a lot about our money personality. See which one you identify with. So the first one is a person that tends to take a little bit of an ostrich approach, like head in the sand. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. I don't have to deal with it. If I just pretend the money isn't there and the numbers aren't happening, then somebody else will figure it all out for me at the end of the year, right? They have a tendency to rely on someone else to handle the money, and they put a lot of trust in others to handle that piece for them. This type of personality will follow financial advice that's given to them, often without question. And this can be a bad thing sometimes if you're not trusting trustworthy people with your financial advice. They tend to find themselves in financial trouble before they realize they're in trouble, and they tend to not know what their finance situation is. So that's personality number one. So the next one, these people love the feeling of having a large sum of money in their bank account. Even if they don't have it, that is like a goal to them. It's almost like their security blanket, the money in the bank is. They have a target number that to them means financial security and safety, but often that number super far exceeds what they actually need to have in liquid funds available. They are compulsive savers. They review their finances often because they want to know exactly where they stand, but it comes from a place of scarcity more than a place of I want to know. It's like, I need to make sure that number is what it needs to be. That personality is a saver. So our third one, these people tend to have one goal around money. Money is a game, and they are in it to win it, whatever that takes. So they are researchers. They have a lot of financial knowledge. They easily comprehend financial conversations, and they love engaging in conversations about money, and they tend to trust their instinct when it comes to those things. However, they also tend to shy away from advice that doesn't align with them. So the example I like to use here is like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. Somebody with this personality that doesn't understand that would be like, no, it's not real. I don't even want to talk about it. It doesn't exist. All right, our last one, these people tend to fall a little bit on the side of money as either evil or it changes people. Filthy rich is something they say pretty often. They don't allow money to influence their decisions, which can result in them overspending or not investing in themselves when they have an opportunity to do so. That is a money monk personality. So now that you know those, I just like to start off there because it just kind of gets your brain spinning a little bit out of the normal conversations around taxes and numbers so that you can really start to engage. Now, so the big question, I think, for most of us in the room is, what the heck can I write off on taxes without having the IRS bang on my door, right? So I want to talk really quickly about the rule that the IRS has for business deductions being ordinary and necessary. I don't even think the IRS knows what that means half the time. So ordinary means it is an ordinary business expense in your profession. So as private investigators, that is going to look different than maybe what as an accountant we would have as ordinary business expenses. Necessary means that even though it may not be ordinary, it is necessary for you to conduct business and produce an income. Can I defend this if the IRS comes knocking on my door wanting me to show them why this is ordinary and necessary? So home office deductions, this is probably one of the most common expenses that I hear people saying, my accountant told me not to write that off because it's a red flag. Everything with the IRS is a red flag at one point or another. So my advice is if it's a legitimate business expense for you, document it, keep the records that you need, and then write it off. So for home office, some of the things you're looking at are mortgage interest if you're paying a mortgage, or rent if you rent a space, property taxes, utilities, insurance, maintenance and repairs. The important piece to know is the size of your home office. The second key to a home office is it has to be used exclusively for business. My office, I have kids, so my office has, and I homeschool one of them, so my office has like a homeschool desk in one corner and then I'm in the other corner. So I'm only able to write off a portion of the office space because it's not exclusive. So you have to be aware of that. And I'll tell you, I've dealt with audits on this topic, and the auditor is going to ask for pictures of your office. So that's something that on a documentation piece, I would just say just randomly take pictures of your office and email them to yourself or upload them into Google Drive so you have date stamped pictures showing that it is an actual office. Normal business expenses like advertising costs, putting things out there, newspaper ads, I don't even know if Yellow Page ads exist anymore, Facebook ads, any online ads, Google ads, things like that, that's all gonna be a business deduction for you. The networking event, that is an advertising expense for you. And the reason I tell you that's an advertising expense is because the IRS changed a couple things a few years ago, and membership dues are now one of those things that they scrutinize a little harder. So when you're doing a networking event with the intent of advertising your business, that is an advertising expense. What is the purpose of you spending the money? And then where does that make sense to fall? So I had somebody I was talking to the other day, and they're going to a conference for advertising, but it's an educational seminar. And so we were debating back and forth on where that fit, and we landed with education because if the IRS came looking, that's where it's going to fit most appropriately on the return. Legal and professional services. So these are things like accounting, your bookkeeper, tax professional fees, those types of things. Now, hear me in this. If you file as a sole proprietor with your personal tax return, your entire tax return fee is not tax deductible for you. You do need to ask your accountant to break out the portion that is specific to the business because that's the only piece you can write off as a business deduction, okay? Entity formation, so if you're setting up an LLC or an S corporation, partnership, anything like that, the cost of doing that, the state filing fees plus any attorney's fees related to that, association dues, those are deductible for you. So I went through and I made sure to do some research on that one for you guys. So it is a business deduction for you. It is not a charitable organization deduction. So that is actually a business deduction. Education. So whether this is professional training to expand your knowledge within the field, whether this is training with a business coach to understand how to run your business more efficiently, whether you're doing sales training, any type of training like that is going to be deductible for you. Schooling is a little bit of a different situation that may fall onto your business side of your return, but it may fall under education credits. So you have to talk to your tax professional to understand how and when that applies, but just know that it's going to fall in one or the other. Ideally, we want all your business expenses to fall on the business because it reduces your taxable income instead of just giving you a credit to offset it, which reducing your taxable income is better. Events, annual seminars, any other work-related event costs, memberships and subscriptions, so any industry-related magazines that you guys may subscribe to. Now, if you have a physical office location and you have magazines come in to sit in the waiting room, if somebody's in the waiting room or the front lobby or whatever, those are also tax deductible for you. Bank fees, merchant processing fees. I'll tell you with bank fees is if you are not separating out your business and your personal bank accounts, you're going to have a hard time getting some of those bank fees deducted. You may get them deducted, but if the IRS comes and audit you, you're going to have a hard time proving that that's a legitimate expense. Make sure you have a separate business bank account. Vehicle expenses. So here's the rule of thumb that the IRS is looking at. We're going to use home office as an example first. Home office here, and let's say that you need to make some trips out. You have to go to the grocery store, drop a kid off at school, and go to the post office. So what you want to look at is the distance between everything. So if the post office is closest to your home and you drive there first, that's tax deductible for you. Then taking the kid to school, going to the grocery store back home, not tax deductible for you. Let's say you have a physical office and you're leaving home to go to your office. That is a commute. That's not tax deductible for you. The way to make some of that mileage tax deductible is to figure out a business stop on the way to the office. Figure out that closest stop to your house and then go to the office. Because as soon as you make that first business stop of the morning, everything business related from that point on is deductible. If you can have a dedicated business vehicle, it makes everything a lot easier. Even if you have a 100% dedicated business vehicle, you still want to track mileage in that first year and then talk to your tax professional about what that looks like and whether mileage or actual is better. Because you only can take one. If you're taking mileage, you don't get to write off the gas and the oil changes and the tires and the maintenance and all of that stuff. You only get the mileage. On top of the mileage, you get tolls and parking, but that's about the extent of what you can add to that. Your accountant's going to look and you need to discuss whether your mileage is going to give you a better write-off or your actual expenses are going to give you a better write-off. But there are some specific rules about once you put a vehicle in and you use actual, about whether or not you have to stay in that, when you can switch back to using mileage. So you just want to make sure the first year or two that you're tracking everything until you get a handle on what's the best way for you. Interest paid, this is one that I think people often overlook. If you have a credit card that you're using for business expenses, that interest is deductible for you. If you have a vehicle that's 100% business use, the interest on that is potentially deductible for you. Equipment, laptops, iPads, tablets, cell phones, those types of things. 100% business use, doing what we call depreciation, but you can use some bonus depreciation to take them all in the same year. But keep track of those things that you're buying. So yeah, that leads into telephone use that you can only claim the business percentage. So if you do have a phone that it's your personal and your business phone, safe rule of thumb is about 50% unless you want to itemize all of that, and then you may be able to take more than the 50% on that. Travel costs associated with work trips. Office cleaning, whether that's in your home or your physical office. If it's in your home, you just need to figure out what the space, again, that would go in your home office expenses for that percentage there. Contract labor. How many of you have children under the age of 18 still at home? Did you know you can hire your kids in your business and basically have tax-free income? As a self-employed individual, it's $12,004 somewhere in there, and it changes each year. It's basically the standard deduction amount for a single filing individual. Not on W-2, not on a 1099, and they don't have to file a tax return for that. If your kids are into really expensive sports or hobbies or activities, you can basically pay them to pay for their own stuff. And it's tax-free income into the household for you. Very similar situations if you file on a Schedule C with a spouse. Your spouse, you would have to report the income, but there are a lot of benefits when you're a business owner to employing your spouse and children. Now, if you file as an S corporation or a partnership or a C corporation, you can still employ your kids, and they're not subject to income tax, but you would have to pay the FICA taxes, the Social Security and the Medicare. But there's lots of cool stuff you can do with hiring your kids to work for you. I have an 11-year-old boy, and he's into like really expensive video games and like all the stuff that mom just doesn't understand. And so every time he asks for one, I'm like, well, how about this job in the office that I have that you can come do? And then he earns his money, I get a tax write-off, and I essentially paid for it, but I didn't pay for it. As long as they are your child or grandchild under the age of 18. Once they hit 18, the rules change on that.
Do you have to pay a minimum wage?
Yes. And if the IRS ever comes looking, you want to have really good documents of this. So we just have a notebook in my office where we just clock him in and we clock him out and we mark what he did. But it does have to be minimum wage that you're paying him, yes. And you can't pay him an extremely unreasonable wage either. So you can't tell, like I couldn't tell my 11-year-old that he's going to come take my trash out, dust my office, and shred paperwork, and I'm going to pay him $40 an hour to do it. Child labor got expensive. Office expenses, I think we all know this, software, pens, paper, those types of things, that all comes up. Postage and shipping, meals for business activities. So this is one that the IRS is putting a little bit of scrutiny on. I know the last couple of years we've been able to take 100% as a business owner for all of our meals. That came through with some of the COVID laws that passed for taxes. However, starting in 2023, it's shifting back to what it used to be, where it's 50%. The IRS is really cracking down on this in the sense that they're seeing a lot of people that are like, well, I'm at work, so my lunch is deductible, or I'm driving to a client and I haven't eaten yet, so I'm going to swing through a fast food place and that's deductible. Those things are not. There has to be a business purpose. So what you're looking for with meals is one of two things. One, are you having a business meeting where business is being discussed? On these receipts, I highly, highly recommend that across the top of it, you put who you met with and what the purpose of the meeting was, so that when you have that receipt to come back to at tax time, that it's all there for you and you know exactly what it was. Because if you get audited, that's one thing the IRS is looking for, is who did you meet with and what was the purpose of it. Now, if you have employees or contractors that work for you and you're buying them lunch, there's a couple different things in place there. If you're doing like client appreciation events or things like that, that can still potentially be 100%. So just make sure you're watching those things there. Clothing. I think this is one of the most common questions I get, is about clothing and business suits or business attire and being able to be deductible. IRS has a very hard line on this. If it is suitable for everyday wear, it is not deductible. So even if you wear a 3-piece suit to work and you're like, well, I'd only wear it to work, I'd never wear it anywhere else, it's still suitable for everyday wear if you chose to dress like that every day. So it's not deductible. So the only way that clothing becomes deductible is if it is branded to your business. Health insurance when you're self-employed. This is one that is actually a business deduction, not necessarily on your business return, but in a very roundabout way, you can actually deduct the cost of health insurance for you and your family if you are paying for it as a self-employed individual. So if you have a spouse that is a W-2 employee and the insurance is actually through their business, you cannot deduct that. But if you're paying for it out of pocket and not through an employer, then you can write off the health insurance. Couple things that are not deductible that I like to just touch on. Any personal services to enhance your appearance or health. So the only time those types of things would count is if you're specifically having them done for, like, if you're getting headshots done, talk to your accountant. And I say that when I say talk to your accountant, and I'm going to preface that with, if you lined up 10 tax professionals in a line and asked every single one of them the same question, you'll get a similar but different answer from all of them. So just know that you want to document to make sure that you're prepared. I think we've covered everything on the deduction list. So really cool thing about the travel expense and the way to be able to write off some personal fun time when you're traveling is to what we call in the industry bookending your travel. So if you have to go out of town and let's say that you need to be somewhere on a Thursday and Friday and you're like, well, it's a really cool place and it's got a beach and sun and I want to stay there for the weekend and enjoy some time, try and do something on Monday that is also related to your business, whether that's meeting with a client, whether it's meeting with another private investigator and like doing some back and forth pieces. And then because your business purpose was on Thursday and Friday and Monday, your whole trip's deductible, and on Saturday and Sunday you get to go hang out at the beach with your toes in the sand. I love that one. Okay, so I want to touch a little bit on organization. Paper receipts, digital receipts, what do I need? I'm not a fan of paper receipts. I tend to just have what I call my CFO time, and I encourage all my clients to do this. It's our financial officer time. Once a week where I just take all those receipts and I just scan them into the computer. I tend to do it by month and then by category so that it's easy to find those things. But here's the thing is if you are to get audited, they're looking for proof of the expense and proof of payment. The proof of payment can be your bank or your credit card statement. Why do I have to keep the receipts if I have the bank or credit card statement for it? Because if you get audited, they're looking for both of those. You could just be running a Costco expense through your bank statement and it could be groceries for your household. And if you don't have the receipt, you have no way to justify that expense. On the receipt, it has to show the name of the vendor, so who you paid, the date you paid, and the dollar amount. And then if it's a meal receipt, make sure you're putting across the top who and what. So the IRS typical audit window is about 3 years, but if they think you substantially understated something, they have 6 years to audit you. So I always say once we're in year 7, it's safe and we can get rid of everything. A lot of CPAs, when they go through school to get their license, they are not specializing in tax. They're specializing in accounting. And that may sound like it's very similar, but it is not. So you want somebody who specializes in tax. You want somebody who specializes in small business tax. The IRS has pushed through in the last couple of years some licensing requirements, whereas before that there was no licensing requirements for the tax industry. So you do want to make sure they're licensed. Couple things that I always recommend to ask people because it's going to tell you if they're actually serious about it. Ask them if they have E&O insurance, errors and omissions. Because if they make a mistake on your return, that's what's going to defend them and make sure you're covered. And if they tell you their E&O insurance is through State Farm or American Family Insurance, that's not true E&O insurance. Another thing that you can ask them is, what are their specialties? I've always worked with small businesses. I don't do corporate tax returns. So if I had somebody come to me for a corporation, I always refer them out. So make sure not only are they familiar a little bit with your industry, but also with how you run your business. And I think the most important piece is make sure that you're comfortable talking to them. There's a level of comfort you need to have with your tax professional because you are having sometimes tough conversations with them. There's a lot of in-depth financial conversations about, I don't know how I'm going to afford this tax bill, or I didn't set aside enough, or all of those things. And so you want to make sure that it's somebody that you're really comfortable having those open and honest conversations with.
I have one last question.
Yes.
Last question. So let's say hypothetically, when you started
I love hypothetical questions.
you started off as a newbie, maybe you were doing some things incorrectly in your tax returns, and then after a few years, you realize your errors. Is it best to amend or just move forward and do it right?
On this side, in my tax professional life, I would say you should amend. On this side, in my very human, knowing that we're all human side, depending on what the mistakes were, if they're minimal, you may just wait and see if the IRS catches it and see if it just slides under the radar.
Any last questions?
I'm like,
Let's give Mandy a round of applause.
My name is Brianna Rendon, and I'm the first ever intern for the Ppiac. I attend MSU Denver as a criminal justice and criminology major and a minor in legal studies. This spring, I'm a senior and I'm set to graduate in May. When I graduate, I plan on pursuing a law degree and focusing on civil law. Prior to applying to this internship, I did not know any specifics about the world of investigations aside from what I've seen on dramatized TV shows. Yet, when learning about the Ppiac, I've expanded my view and have come to realize just how labor-intensive investigations can be. I now know that they require a lot of resources and relationships in order to produce effective results. I do think that many individuals seeking a new career or a career change can benefit from the skills that are required in not only private investigations, but also security and other legal professions. I'm looking forward to speaking with Colorado legislators in my time here with the Ppiac, as well as working alongside the legislative committee. I'm also looking forward to finding new ways for the Ppiac to recruit new members and to continue expanding across Colorado. My name is Brianna Rendon, and I'm the first ever intern for the Ppiac.
I'll just introduce myself really quick, and then if you guys want to introduce yourself. So my name is Kati Scheibler. I am originally from Denver, just moved down to Canyon City area about 6 months ago. We have a crew, I guess, an aggregate of people that I've met over the years that have been involved in pet recovery. So your cat, your dog goes missing, we get involved to help you get them back. Now, whether or not that's they ran away, they've been stolen, kind of a combination of things. I've worked for the state as an investigator for the last 10 years, on and off for the last 2. Been a stay-at-home mom for a while, so brain doesn't work quite the way that it used to. So bear with me if there's typos or errors, just know that that's why. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Renee Becko. I met Katie, I think, on my second pet recovery, where someone said their little white dog was stolen, and someone gave it to the wrong person. So I recommend if you have a little white dog, you microchip him, because the guy thought 3 different people stole his little white dog. And Katie kind of jumped in and helped me with that one. Unfortunately, we did find out the dog was chipped later, and Katie tracked that chip and found out the dog had deceased. I was ready to give up at that point, but Katie said we gave him closure. And so I went on, and we've done a lot of recoveries. And I do a lot of stuff at home where I match dogs, like from a lost dog to a found dog or a lost dog to a shelter. Some of the other ladies do more out in the field. Pam is like this DNA cat expert where she can look at a cat's face and find it. We all think they all look alike when they're tabbies, but she's really good at it. Here's Pam.
I will say that our presentation focuses mostly on dogs because that's the majority of what I do, the majority of what we do, but there are cats too.
I'm Pam McChesney. I'm retired, but somehow I got into pet recovery. It was totally by accident, and I ended up meeting these nice ladies online, and we've been working together for a few years here. It's just something that's been in my heart. I had lost my pet, and I never found her, but I kept finding other people that had lost their pets too. And I was seeing their pet somewhere else, and they didn't know their pet was there. So I was able to connect with them and help them connect with somebody that found their pet. Some of it has been through investigating, trying to figure out how to find people, because I didn't have a direct link to them. It's kind of amateur for me. Finding somebody, like I'll find like their relative or something and say, hey, I'm trying to get a hold of so-and-so that may have found a dog, which sounds crazy because they don't even live in the same state, but just those types of things. So it's just been kind of it's been a very rewarding thing that has happened in my life here. So thank you.
My name is Barb Sebring. I met Katie probably 2 years ago where there was a gentleman driving down Santa Fe dragging a dog, and the dog happened to be released right in front of my driveway where I work. So that's kind of how we met, just trying to get more information on that. 2 years ago also, just before that, had been on my first pet rescue with a 2-pound Yorkie that went 8 miles in 9 days. Very rough terrain. Somehow got into this next door group of people. I bet they had 500 people on their little feed trying to find this dog, and it was just weird because people were coming from everywhere. You'd be out miles away, pull off to put up a poster, and there'd be some lady there already, and it was my first. And just that afternoon when I went home after they found her, there was another one like 2 blocks away, and it wound up being in the backyard behind my house. It was just, I've had really odd stuff happen that way for me. But so yeah, it's super rewarding, and when you help somebody, it's crazy. And having these guys in my life now for 2 years has been amazing. Changed my life. Changed it. So thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna try to fly through this, maybe not too fast, so stop me if you have questions. There's a lot of things that I'm gonna throw at you that just barely skim the surface, so we'll see how this goes. One of the most important things that I want you to walk away from here, there's two, but one of the most important things is when you see a stray animal or you know somebody that sees an animal that's loose, think that they're lost, not that they're unloved, and that they have a home, because most of the time they do. So I kind of want to touch on who's who in Colorado and why it matters. So there's a lot of players involved in pet rescue, pet recovery, and the laws behind who can do what. So PACFA, which is under the Department of Agriculture, is the Pet Animal Care Facilities Act. It's a group of individuals that have the statute that regulates shelters, groomers, rescues, breeders, things like that. BAP also falls under the Department of Agriculture. They're the Bureau of Animal Protection. They're the investigative unit that trains people like at Denver Dumb Friendly to investigate mistreatment of animals. And then it gets into your local police, local animal control, volunteers, shelter staff, and then there's some other paid groups that do recovery and tracking. And every once in a while in the news, you'll see that CDA gets involved with, for some reason, usually it's horses and livestock being mistreated. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, there was a pretty big case out of Weld County that they seized like 75 goats and horses. So when you see that in the news, CDA and Bureau of Animal Protection are usually involved in that. MARN is the Missing Animal Response Network. They do a training that certifies pet detectives, that's what they're called. Some of them are volunteer-based, most of them are volunteer-based or receive donations, most of them are not receiving payment of any kind, some of them are. We have a couple here in Colorado, and I'll touch on them. And then you have people like Karen Tarquin, who is like head honcho of pet recovery with her dog. She's an ex-law enforcement officer. She comes from out of state. You pay her to come try to track your dog. Justice Takes Flight was in the news with the fires up in Erie. They have a network of people. I think it's mostly just 2 dogs, though, that do some scent-based tracking. 2 people I want to touch on that are MARN certified, or 2 groups. It's Katie Albright. She did most of my training. She was out of Colorado. She's currently in Oregon. Her business is Missing Pet Recovery Services. And then Summit Lost Pet Rescue is in the news all the time. They're out of Summit County, and they recover animals in the craziest terrain, the craziest situations. And that's Melissa and Brandon, and we work with them often. And then in southern Colorado, we have the SoCo Power Responders. They're out of Pueblo. They do tracking and trapping. These guys are a little bit more organized than we are. They have their own nonprofits, businesses, Facebook pages. We don't really have that. We just kind of hodgepodge. And then Power Retrievers, they're out of Highlands Ranch, and we have worked with them. And there are a lot of people just like us that go completely unnoticed. I just want that to be touched on all over the metro area, all over the state. So if we can't help you, we can find somebody that can. Just real briefly, I want to touch on stats because I think it's important to know just how many lost animals there are and what the outcomes are. So this is from ASPCA, I think it's from 2019. Approximately 6 million animals go into shelters every year. That's astronomical. The good news is, in the last 4 or 5 years, most of them are getting adopted or returned. However, in our area, which is the mountain region, these are the stats from ASPCA for our region. We are having a lot of animals come in, but in the last 2 years, our shelter population is increasing. So something to think about. If you do want a new dog or a new cat, maybe consider adopting first. This is kind of the bad part. Nobody wants to talk about it, but it happens. So every year, approximately 920,000 animals are euthanized. It's mostly cats. So if you have a cat, make sure it's chipped. Take good care of it. Try not to let it outdoors. We won't get into that argument, but significant increase that you're not going to get your cat recovered if it's an outdoor cat. So 4.1 million shelter animals get adopted every year. That's great. What we want to focus on is what we call the RTO, which is return to owner. And this is nationwide, not just Colorado and the western states. 810,000 animals get returned to their owner every year, mostly dogs. Unfortunately, not a lot of cats. Just briefly, I want to touch on the Humane Society of Fremont County out of Canyon City because they're near and dear to my heart now that I live down there. They do great work for as small of a shelter as they are. They are a teeny tiny shelter that takes from multiple counties, which is unusual for most shelters. And they are the only, well, not the only, they're the second certified no-kill shelter in the state. They've been certified no-kill for, I think, 8 years now. And so she gave me her stats, and for a teeny tiny shelter, you can imagine, they receive 495 public drop-offs, okay? And that means stray animals that were found, not relinquished by owners. And in addition to that, on top of that, animal control agents, which includes court holds, so if a dog bites somebody or something like that, 376. So that's their stats for 2022. But they have a combined save rate of 98%, which means almost every animal that comes into that facility gets out at one point or another. There are some others that technically fall above that line, but I don't know which ones are actually certified. If you go to No Kill Colorado, I believe they have a list there. So one of the things that ASPCA pushes on shelters is to try to lower their income rates. And the way that they do that is if you have somebody that finds an animal, you don't want to include that number as an intake number because it's going to increase your intake numbers. It doesn't look good. That sounds good, except for it leads people to not bring animals to the shelter, right? And that's what we call peer-to-peer lost and found. It's what ASPCA calls peer-to-peer exchanging, I guess. PACFA, state agency, doesn't recommend it. In fact, they say you shouldn't do it, and if you do it multiple times in a year and hold an animal for longer than 12 hours, you're subject to licensure. So we typically try to get people to take animals to the shelter because that's the way that they're going to get home. And if they don't get home, we help them get tagged out in most circumstances. So most shelters don't allow it. If you were to go to Foothills and say, I want to hold this dog in my house until an owner comes forward, they're gonna talk you out of it. Other county shelters like Boulder, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Weld County, they do allow you to do that and they do post to their website, but most of them are not really not prepared to post, and most of them are not really prepared to get that RTO number when animals are held in home. I won't read this to you. This is an email from Nick Fisher, who's I think he's director, I don't know exactly what his title is, of PACFA, and this is the state's interpretation of why you can't hold them in your house and what they tell shelters. Something else to note that you probably don't know if you're not involved in this is rescues cannot take stray animals. You have to be licensed as a shelter, you have to be a brick and mortar facility, and you have to be open to the public. So like Golden Retriever Rescue of the Rockies, everybody knows them, right? You find a Golden Retriever out on the highway, they can't take it. So the problems of how animals get out. Well, who here has an animal that's ever gotten loose or lost? Did anybody ever not get them back? Terrible feeling, right? Worst feeling in the whole world. So there's a lot of reasons for why that might happen. Accidents, obviously. Dogs run out the door. They might jump the fence. Lots of things could happen. More recently, we're seeing a lot of theft out of cars, out of yards, wherever. Something else that we run into a lot is some rescues aren't properly training their fosters, aren't properly training their new adopters, and aren't properly training their transporters. So people who are driving out of state and bringing dogs back, they get out of their collars, they get off on the highway. They're not making sure that adopters know to do perimeter checks. They're leaving dogs outside by themselves. So we try to talk about the types of equipment that you should have to make sure that your dog stays where it's supposed to be. And then lastly, we do run a negligent ownership, frequent flyers, and have to handle those a little bit differently. So our objectives for, so I'll call us a group, essentially we want to return animals to their rightful owners. There's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily want animals to go back to their rightful owners, and so there's a sense of vigilantism sometimes that we run into. We kind of have to deal with that a little bit differently. We educate the community on preventative measures as best we can, and we help update chips. We help raise money to get animals chipped. We help raise money to get animals out of shelters. Pretty much any facet that surrounds an animal getting home, we help do. And then, as they touched on, we work with owners. They come to us and say, hey, my dog's lost, my cat's lost. We walk them through every step of what it takes to try to get them home. And then one of the most important things I think, and we don't talk about this a lot, there's a lot of drama in pet rescue, drama that I never experienced until I was an adult. And I really do, try to maintain relationships with anybody involved. That means other volunteers, rescues, law enforcement. One of the things we say often is finders isn't keepers. A lot of people make assumptions when they see a skinny dog or a matted cat that this dog has been dumped, this cat is neglected, and we really want to try to make sure that people aren't doing that. So real briefly, I'm going to touch on the laws and then kind of walk through best practices and what we do. So this came from Lost Dogs of America. This is a photo I share a lot. This dog's name is Lucy. She had medical conditions, made her really skinny. If you found this dog on the street, you would go, oh my God, she's starving. She can't possibly go back to her owner. Well, that wasn't the case. She was very well cared for. Medical condition was getting under control, and she had a home, was happy and healthy. But basically, you can't run a rescue or a shelter without being licensed. You really should not be rehoming animals without a license and you can't impound without a license. And then some of you probably know more about this than we do, but I did put the criminal code in here for theft because it can apply. I would say in very rare circumstances does it apply with pets, but it happens. Most of the time, I would say almost always, if a dog has been loose and picked up and kept, they won't take a police report because it was negligent on you, the dog got out, so then you have to go the civil route. So what we do when someone keeps a dog, sometimes we don't know the owner, sometimes we do. If we do know the owner, we try to push reward. We do raise money for rewards. And that's only if we believe that somebody has the dog. We don't want to do that if the dog is skittish, because then they go chasing them all over hell and back, and it just makes our job harder. We help people file police reports. Sometimes we have to push agencies to actually take it seriously. We do civil assists. I've done probably half a dozen or so last year. And I've been involved at least in 2 cases where there's been a civil suit for Plevin to get an animal back. A couple years ago, but there was a kangaroo loose in Douglas County that we were trying to help track, so weird things happen. Yeah, so where I'm kind of hoping, I do have some experience as an investigator, nothing really crazy, like I work in pesticide enforcement and marijuana enforcement, but sometimes we need help with things that we just don't have the experience, which is why I'm hoping that we can network a little bit here, because sometimes we do need help tracing names, like mostly open source stuff, but names, phone numbers, addresses, emails. We run into things where police aren't taking it seriously, but we have plates, cameras, they're everywhere, so we deal with that. And then every once in a while, I'll help send a demand letter. I haven't had to do that in a long time. So anyway, if you think you might be able to help with that, let me know. Second thing to walk away with, if you have an animal, chip your animal. Chip your animal, chip your animal. Chip it. I can't say it enough times. Keep it up to date. You move, you need to check it, because that is the most common reason animals don't get home. They don't update their information, and there aren't very many people who know, oh, well, it's outdated. I can still find you. Somebody has to let me know that I need to find you. So you got to check it regularly. Chips migrate as animals get older, usually goes towards their hips. So if you have an older animal, make sure you're scanning their whole body. So this is just best practices. If you find an animal or lose an animal, contact the chip company, notify them that they're lost, notify local animal control within a specific radius. Usually I say within the abutting counties. If you have a dog that runs, maybe do it a little bit further. Post to Facebook groups. I can't even tell you how many. Pabus, which is a free website, Pet FBI, which is a free website, Nextdoor, Ring. These are the ones that we always try to push owners to post to. So some best practices on flyers. Really want to keep them simple, you want to keep them bright, and you want to fight inattentional blindness, which is things that are around you that you just don't notice, even though they're there. There's a rule that's called 5-5-55. You basically have 5 seconds and 5 words to get somebody's attention. And then tag your car. This is not something that most people do, but we recommend it every time. You get those window markers, you put your pet's picture on the back, and then you ask every family member to do it and every neighbor to do it. And then you have 50 cars driving around with this information. So calming signals, I have the video linked up here. I probably won't play it for you, but it's here so you have it. I would say this is probably, I take it back. This is probably the second most important thing to walk away with. So dog behavior, they have specific cues they do for other dogs to calm them down. And that's what you're trying to mimic when you're around a skittish dog. So I put some do's and don'ts up here. You never want to make eye contact. You don't want to call them. You don't want to reach for them. You don't want to squat, which is what most people do, right? You squat and you're like, oh, here, and then they take off, right? So, and this even happens with owners. So there are circumstances where you really have to treat that dog like a wild animal. And so what you do need to do, if you're ever out and you see a loose dog, first thing you need to do is take a photo, because then we can verify if it's the dog we're looking for. Yawning is a cue that calms them down. You can lay down, walk at 45-degree angles, drop some food. If they're behind you, monitor with a camera. So best practices for when we have a dog that we're tracking or trapping. I'm going to get into scent a little bit. Cameras are important. I'm not really going to talk about them, but basically those game cameras, you guys might use them, I don't know. For hunting, typically is what I think of. And then traps, and then occasionally drones. We don't have a drone, and I don't know if we've ever actually hired anybody to use a drone.
None of it is.
So we don't have very good success with drones or tracking dogs. So I typically don't recommend either one, but I'm going to tell you about a story where it did work. So this is Gary. Gary was lost 24 hours after he was adopted, like most of them are. And this was 4th of July weekend, which is a fabulous weekend for skittish lost dogs, right? But His foster was bonded to him, and he was bonded to his foster. Those are his foster's clothes. She drove up to give them to us. That's the trap. That's the house that he kept showing up to. And it is never this easy, and it never happens this fast. But this is a box trap. This is one of the types of traps that we use. They come in various sizes. They look like little have-a-heart mouse traps, if you've ever saved a little mouse or a cat. Sometimes they're not big enough for some of the big dogs, though. But there's a strip plate at the bottom, that black part, where once the dog steps on it, the door closes behind them and locks. And they panic. Most of the time they panic. So it's important to monitor, and it's important here, that we're in the suburbs in the city. Somebody can be there pretty quickly. That's not the case where I live anymore. But you need to make sure that somebody's within 10 minutes, probably at max, because they can get hurt. They can break the trap. Depending on the type of trap you use, they can dig out or they can jump out. After you save the dog, you don't want them to freeze to death either, because that would be awful. So some things that we talked about run into problems with chips is they're outdated or unregistered, and then people like me and a handful of other people in the state can trace them. You have to be associated with a rescue or animal control, otherwise they don't release the information on the chip to you. This is a one type of universal scanner, just looks like a big wand. You scan all over their body. Sometimes there's old technology, sometimes there's international chips. I've had some out of Germany, had some out of Mexico, and they're a little bit harder to trace. So those exist. And then as I mentioned, the ISO compatible versus compliant. If it's ISO compliant, you're set. So like I said, drones. So this is Farah. She was lost in Canyon City, or outside Canyon City after a car accident, which we see a lot of that too. Please restrain your dogs in the car because you never know. You gotta watch out for the other guy. She was missing 3 months. But they kept getting sightings, and then they kind of dwindled, and then they got another sighting. So the Fremont County Sheriff's Office used their infrared drone, saw her, went out, and she was safe within 10 minutes. She was on the news. So this one, I just got new information on this guy today, but this is Bear, Rottweiler found on Highway 36 last week, who the story was, he was found in Colorado, but he was stolen out of Texas. Owners from Texas are coming to get him. Well, not exactly. It turns out he was actually legally adopted out of Texas a couple years ago, and for whatever reason, the shelter never contacted the original owner and never updated the chip. So problems with chips, even at the shelter level. But he's back with his family here, so happy ending nonetheless. And this is Snoopy. Snoopy should have gotten a story, but he didn't. So Snoopy was found outside of Chicago, and he actually went missing from Colorado in 2015. The only reason that he got home, the only reason his family, who was a child at the time, was able to see him again was because his chip information had been updated. And he's like 1 million years old now. So just real quick, I want to show you what a Missy trap looks like. This is a bigger trap with a gate and a door. They can be magnetic and electronic, or they can be weight bearing. This is Padme. This is the one that went missing in Boulder that we found in Golden. So here, and you'll see it better in the next video, but basically there's an infrared beam, I guess, like a garage door beam, that once it's broken, the door slams shut. These tend to work better than the weight ones. It's really just as simple as that. Other than this is this guy's dog. So they tend to panic. They can dig out, which is, like I said, why you really need to be on site. And make sure that you have some kind of leash, a snappy snare, which is like a snare on a long pole, so that you can actually get the dog to safety. If you ever use a box trap, make sure the box trap goes into a secured environment so you don't release the dog you just trapped. And that's really it. This is a page that we made that ended up going on the news. And really the design was for dogs and cats that we haven't had any sightings of in a long, long time. And so you can go to this page and you can see things that we've posted. My email's on there. You can contact us that way. I think we're easily, between all of us, probably in the thousands of reunited. We're still working on 10, 15, and they just, we may never find them, but you never give up. And I guess one thing I didn't touch on that I should say really quick, if you come across an animal with legitimate evidence of abuse or neglect, like what you want to do is get law enforcement involved, have them come take the dog from you so they maintain chain of custody, have it go to the shelter. We really try, I understand the desire, especially bleeding hearts of pet rescue, to be a vigilante and go steal a dog. Don't do that, because it's not going to do anybody any good. It's a little bit different when you're talking to Ppiac.
Great, thank you. Thank you for listening to the PPIC podcast. I hope you were entertained and learned something. If you liked our show, let our guests know on their social media and tell your friends and coworkers about us. I also want to invite you to our in-person monthly meetings, conferences, and development courses. The first Wednesday of each month at 6 p.m., we have our networking and training meetings. We even provide food. Learn more at www.ppiac.org or email me at training@ppiac.org. My name is Terrical Cone, reminding you that an action is worth 1,000 ideas. And we'll see you at the next meeting.
Give me